So today we are joined by Dr. Robert Balfanz, Senior Scientist and Co-Director at the Center for Social Organization of Schools, Johns Hopkins University School of Education. Through his research, advocacy, and practice, he has established himself as the nation's trusted broker of evidence and information when dealing with the nation's most challenged, vulnerable children. He is often referred to as the national expert on dropout prevention. He has published widely on secondary school reform, high school dropouts, early warnings, chronic absenteeism, and instructional interventions in high-poverty schools. And he's also a frequent speaker on dropout prevention and early warning indicators as a strategy to help students most at risk of failing. He focuses on translating research findings into effective school improvement strategies, and because he sits so effectively at the confluence of research, practice, and advocacy, Dr. Balfanz has the unique capacity to respond in evidence-based ways to the challenges of our most distressed schools. He's a proven leader in setting the conditions for others to also address similar needs nationwide. So we are fortunate to have him with us, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Balfanz to talk about chronic absenteeism and ESSA.
Great. Hello, everybody. We're here to spend a little time this afternoon learning about how the importance of chronic absenteeism, what we can do about it, and how ESSA gives us some nice opportunities to do so. So what I want to do now is just begin by level setting us a little bit. Next slide, please. What do we talk about when we say chronic absenteeism? We're all familiar with average daily attendance. That's how schools have measured attendance forever. It's how many kids on average are in the building on a given day. That may have had utility once, actually trying to figure out ways to figure out how many farm kids were showing up, to figure out how much money if we had to spend for how many teachers. It doesn't give us a lot of utility anymore, but it's still the dominant way we think about attendance, and it often gives us not great, often wrong information about hiding problems that are there and things that are addressable that if we knew about them, but by just looking at average daily attendance, we don't see it. We're also familiar with truancy, which is really about, who's missing school without permission. We know every state has a different set of truancy laws, that if you miss a certain combination of days in certain ways without permission, the sort of state judicial machinery can be start turning against you. Again, there's a few minor times when that may be helpful, but in general, we found that that's a very ineffective way to increase attendance. And then really our most recent thing about attendance is this idea of chronic absenteeism, which is really about you're missing enough school that it matters, that it interferes with your success in school, it interferes with your ability to graduate, with your ability to be prepared for post-secondary success, for your ability to succeed in elementary school, for younger kids. It's really where it tells us we have to do something about this because it's not a good situation and it's really interfering with our kids' success in school. If we go to the next slide, we can see that chronic absenteeism really is concerned about missing school for any reason. It combines excused absences with unexcused absences with suspensions. What matters is not what the category for not being in school is, but that you're not in school. So it really is total absences looking across all those domains. And again, over time and through history, we've often just segmented our attendance just looking at pieces of it, which has given us an incomplete picture. So if we go to the next slide, we really can see that the modern push to improve attendance and a part of ESSA is really about a broader shifting paradigm and moving away from this idea that it's really unexcused absences and it's about compliance and it's about punitive and legal sanctions and it's about record keeping, to really this idea that we want to count all absences, we want all our kids in school every day, and really understanding there's a very tight relationship we're going to see in a minute between being in school and succeeding in school, which is a good thing. It tells us that being in school makes a real difference, and when our kids miss that and aren't there on a regular basis, it really matters and impacts their life success. So, next slide, please. What we've seen, and I think is a very heartening thing, is under ESSA, states were given the opportunity to identify a fifth indicator, sort of something beyond standard assessments or academic achievement measures. And most states, 35 and counting, have selected some measure of chronic absenteeism to be their fifth indicator. So while many schools have not really had this on their radar screen because it hasn't been asked of them or it hasn't been an attention getter or it's not been in their data systems, that's a big change that's going to happen really over the next year. The law has been passed, but it's really in this next year, from the end of this year through next year, that schools' implementation is happening, and schools will suddenly see that that's on their report card and that they're going to be asked to do something to improve their absenteeism rates. Why should we care about this? Why do we need a fifth indicator? Weren't 4 good enough? The reason is that the evidence is clear. The chronic absenteeism undercuts school improvement efforts for the students who need them the most. And there's just really strong evidence, and it gets stronger and stronger, that in pre-K and K, if you miss a lot of school, it really undercuts your school readiness and your ability to read by 3rd grade. We know if you struggle to read by 3rd grade, that has all their host of negative impacts on your school success down the road. There is a very tight relationship in the middle and high school years between days of attendance and your success in math, and you can see why. Math is a very cumulative and sequential subject, and if you sort of miss a day here, a day there, it really scrambles your ability to learn that consistent picture of math instruction. Missing a month or more of school or 10% or more of school is one of the strongest indicators that you're off track to high school graduation. And we've seen again that even kids that graduate high school with sort of not great attendance records, that finally catches up with them in college and post-secondary success. Next slide, please. We're going to go a little deeper here to see some of the evidence, and this is some slides we've worked up with our partner Attendance Works to really demonstrate the evidence of this. And one thing that's clear is that attendance is even more important for kids that live in poverty. They have less ability to make that experience up through out-of-school experiences or other avenues. So when they miss school, there's really little recourse they have to sort of catch up what they missed. So here we can see some very strong data that shows that kids that miss school in 9th grade and that are free and reduced price lunch have a much bigger consequence for missing that school than the kids that don't. Next slide, please. Here is some evidence, again, that this continues with us even through high school into post-secondary, that students that graduate, but graduate with low attendance rates, struggle early on in college, right? Because then, again, it catches up with them. An important thing to keep in mind, too, is that chronic absenteeism is also in many ways the entry point to the school-to-prison pipeline. There's just a very definitive tracking you can find of progression of events that you miss some school, you get frustrated when you come back, you don't know what you're doing, you don't want to be called on in class because you're not prepared, so you act out instead. That gets you suspended. Now you're sort of on this cycle of both being suspended and not coming to school. That leads to lower course grades and course failure, which leads to grade retention, which leads to you being asked to do the same thing again without much change of circumstances or support, which is usually very unsuccessful. That then often might lead to a period of juvenile justice involvement along the way to dropping out. And once you have those two things together, prior juvenile justice involvement and dropping out, your odds of being in a prison have sort of increased exponentially. And so that, and we can clearly see this evidence from New York and other things shows that overwhelmingly the majority of kids that get involved with the juvenile justice system have prior track records of chronic absenteeism. And we can even see it when we interview some kids and they talk to them, and it's like, I was out of school, and when I was out of school, I started to get involved with kids doing some other stuff, and you can sort of just see how that snowballs. The next thing I want to take a minute on is what do we know about the scale and intensity and location of chronic absenteeism? Is this something everybody has to worry about? Some of us have to worry about, some more than others? It's a little bit of all of those, so let's take a look at it. The truth is that until 2016, just 2 years ago, even a little less than 2 years ago, we had no national statistics on what chronic absenteeism was across the nation. It was only with the Office of Civil Rights survey for the Department of Ed that came out that year and for the first time asked about chronic absenteeism. We could put a sort of a heat map up and show you what that looks across the nation, from some places that have very low chronic absenteeism, less than 10%, to those that have a third or more of their kids missing school. Sort of see how that ranges across the nation. Another thing which popped out from this data, if we go to the next slide, is that half the chronically absent kids were found in just 4% of districts and 12% of schools. So that tells us that a good chunk of chronic absenteeism is highly concentrated in a small number of places, And then the rest is spread widely and sort of thinly. In that really high concentration of 4% of districts and 12% of schools, it was really two situations. One was very large districts. If you have 150,000 kids in your district and just a 10% rate of chronic absenteeism, which you might think, it's below the national average, not too bad, that's still 15,000 kids in your district that are missing a month or more of school and struggling. And then the other group of that were districts that just have super high concentrations of kids, super high need, where they could have rates of 30, 40, even 50% of their kids being chronically absent. Another thing that just really jumps out at you then is among that subset of where it's highly concentrated is that we're talking about a small subset of schools then within that state that, again, have very high levels. So this is some data from Florida telling us that in just 5% of schools in the state, we could find a quarter of the chronically absent kids. In 15% of the schools, we could find half the chronically absent kids. And in a quarter of the schools, we could find two-thirds of the chronically absent kids. Again, telling us that there's a subset of schools that have a much higher concentration than others. You might ask, what about rural communities? Is this just an urban problem? And absolutely it's not, is the answer, unfortunately. It turns out that rural communities have some of the highest individual rates of chronic absenteeism, even though because they are less populated, they have smaller overall numbers of chronically absent kids. But they, again, you can find numerous rural communities with rates of chronic absenteeism as high as 30 and 40%. A key piece of the puzzle to keep in mind when understanding the distribution of chronic absenteeism is that it really follows this U-shaped curve. That it's actually quite high in pre-K and K in first grade. This is usually family challenges with getting kids to school on a regular basis. But again, that's often if it's on our radar screen. Think about the big investment in pre-K and K, and then if 20, 30% of the kids are out there on a regular basis, we're not going to get the outcomes we think we're getting from that important investment. So that's why early on it's really important to track and respond to chronic absenteeism. We can see that this gets better as families get more adjusted and kids to coming to school on a regular basis. And actually, it turns out that it's often in the third and fourth grade we have our highest rates of attendance in the nation. And then with middle school, it starts to spike up again, higher in sixth grade, then seventh grade, then eighth grade, then ninth grade, and arcing up as kids that are getting, often the case, on the verge of dropping out. The year before they drop out, they can miss large amounts of schooling. When we put all this together, it tells us we have a subset of schools that really, at the school level, in the most affected schools, we're talking actually about hundreds of kids that are chronically absent. Some data from Maryland that shows that there was, for example, 26 middle schools with 100 or more kids chronically absent. And you can see when it gets to that level how it sort of overwhelms the school's ability to respond. Who in the school can call 100 kids every day of the year, every day of the week, to say you're chronically absent? At the high school level, we can see there were 60 schools with over 250 kids chronically absent. And at the most extreme, we can see there was more than a dozen schools where there's literally 500 kids, right, chronically absent. Again, you can see how that overwhelms the school's ability to respond at that level and that magnitude. And the other thing that's really important to know is once we get to those high levels of even 20, 25, 30% of kids chronically absent, we're seeing impacts on the kids that are not chronically absent. We're seeing school-wide impacts on achievement and outcomes because you could just imagine what this does is it puts teachers in no-win positions. You have sort of a different set of kids in the classroom every day at those ratios, and you can either say, let me remind you what we did yesterday, sort of slow things down, and then probably lose the kids that were there. They might get restless, start fidgeting. You have to then pay attention to that. Or you could say, if you're not here, I have to move ahead, ask a friend or a partner what happened, and then you lose those kids. They get frustrated, they act out, and you have to suppress it. So that's when, once you get that no-win position, we see school-wide negative effects. And then lastly, the thing to keep in mind, and this is the thing that we are not tracking yet, and is sort of on the horizon to track, is the effects of multiple years of chronic absenteeism on kids. So we know that once you're chronically absent, if we don't do something about it, the odds are you'll have greater odds of being chronically absent the next year. Sure, there are some cases where you had a major illness, there was a major move, your family got evicted, but now you have better circumstances, and it was a one-time thing. But more often than not, it's not a one-time thing. It's an underlying set of circumstances that until we intervene and change them are going to continue. And our systems are not set up to track and see how many days cumulatively kids miss over time. But when we do this in high-needs environments, you can get astounding outcomes that just tell you like how dramatically attendance is affecting success in school of kids and of the schools themselves. So again, some data from Florida. We tracked a cohort of kids from 6th grade to what should have been on-time graduation in high school. And we said, how much are they missing every year and how much does it add up to? And we found that on one hand, right, we got 20% of kids that come every day, right? On average, they're only missing 3 days a year. And over 7 years, they just missed 13 days, right? Over 7 years, they only missed 2 weeks of school. That's on one end of the spectrum. On the other end, there's an equal number of kids, 20%, that have missed over that 7-year period a full year of schooling, a full year. They missed on average more than 28 days a month. That's 5 weeks, but it's 5 weeks every year. You add that up, and they missed a year of schooling. So you can understand why those kids are not going to likely have a chance of succeeding. If you miss a year randomly throughout your middle and high school years, that's going to make it very tough to succeed. Okay? And this tells us that we have to pause here to think about what are some implications of us of really ignoring chronic absenteeism for so long. And one of the things we have to recognize is that we may have been saying, wow, we tried all those things to improve the school, and we got a little bit of difference, but it didn't really seem to work, and that creates sort of a pessimistic idea that maybe some schools can't be improved, it's just too hard, nothing's going to work. But it could very well be in those cases, because we were not paying attention to chronic absenteeism, that the kids that didn't improve because of the intervention didn't work. It didn't improve because they weren't there enough to get the intervention. So it really has to make us think about some of those findings showing interventions didn't work and asking ourselves, was the intervention or was the kids not there getting the intervention? And we know going forward, we really have to track that. As under ESSA, we try evidence-based interventions as a key idea. Do they work? We really have to track what % of our kids are there on a regular enough basis to get that intervention before we decide it works or it doesn't. All right, moving on. Let's get some good news now, though. That was sort of heavy, this big problem we haven't paid attention to. It can be really intense magnitudes. It can really add up over time. It can really undercut a lot of things we're trying to do. But the good news is, as we also have seen over the last several years, is that chronic absenteeism is identifiable, it's reducible, and its impacts are reversible, which means we have evidence that shows if a kid is chronically absent 1 year and the next year they're not chronically absent, we will see their grades going up, we will see their test scores going up, we will see their outcomes going up. Just as we'll take a kid that wasn't chronically absent and becomes chronically absent, we'll see those things going down. So that really tells us that those outcomes in school are very sensitive to the kids being there. But if we get the kids to start attending, we can reverse a lot of those outcomes. It's also an area where modest investments can bring big returns. And this makes reducing chronic absenteeism a powerful and untapped lever of school improvement and student advancement. It's really one of the cards we haven't played yet in our attempt to get schools that work for all kids. And that's the exciting part of it, is we really focus on getting kids there every day. It's something we can do something about. It's something that's measurable. It's something that's actionable, as we're going to see. And it has very positive impacts very quickly. Okay. So basically what we've learned is that to do this, you just got to do the simple thing of measure, monitor, act. Measure, monitor, act. That's sort of the short acronym for how to address this issue. So next slide, please. So the first thing we have to do is really use this 10% definition of chronic absenteeism, which is missing 10% or more of the school days to date, right, as we build our early warning or response system. So we don't want it to be, we don't do anything until you miss 20 days, right? Then the horse is out of the barn, and we're trying to catch up, and it's too, it makes it much harder. So really, if we're monitoring kids from the start of the year and really starting to ask them what's going on, as soon as they hit that 10% threshold, we're acting much earlier and much quicker and much more responsibly, and we're in a position to prevent them from getting to miss 20 days for the full year if we're really using that 10% rule is a trigger for sort of a first just asking the kid what's going on, and then if we see that something real is happening, it wasn't just a cold or a sickness or a family trip, really moving into sort of a support and response plan. Okay, next slide. The other thing we've learned is we really have to continually remind students and parents how many days of schools they missed. And again, this may seem like, are you kidding me? That's what we have to do? Just tell people they missed school? Well, there's been a lot of good research recently that's showing that kids that are chronically absent and their families underestimate the amount of school they missed by up to half. And that's just because we tend to think only in the most recent terms. Are you going to school every day? Oh, sure. I only missed like a Thursday a couple of weeks ago, and I guess last Friday. Yeah, I'm coming most of the times. I'm fine. But the truth is, you only need to miss 2 days every month to become chronically absent, because there's 10 months of school. 2 days every month is 20 days, is 4 weeks of schooling. It can really sneak up to you. And people have found using sending letters and postcards and really non-judgmental nudge letters, just to let you know this is what it is and this is what the impacts it can have, can in itself get you a couple point boost in attendance just by making people aware of what the real situation is. Another key thing we have to do is really unpack and address the contributing factors to chronic absenteeism. We have to really understand the root causes and respond to them, because if we guess wrong, we can actually make things worse, not better. So broadly speaking, kids don't come to school for really 3 and maybe 4 broad reasons. One is there's something preventing them outside of school from getting to school. They have to work to pay the electric bill. They're doing sibling care. They're doing elder care. They're involved in the juvenile justice system. There's something pulling them out of school that absent for that thing, they would be in school. There's another group of kids that are avoiding something in school. They don't feel safe in school or going to school. They're being teased. They're being bullied. Sometimes it's silly adolescent stuff, like I didn't do my homework, and if you don't do your homework, they yell at you, and I don't want to be yelled at, so it's better to be sick today than to be yelled at for not doing my work, right? And then there's just disengagement. Over time, kids feel like not much is going on. I have a complex life. I can go 4 days out of 5 and be okay. They often learn too late that that's not the case, but they believe it going in. And why it's really important, as you can see, is if you guess wrong, your strategy won't be effective. So it's really about talking to kids, building relationships, understanding the underlying cause, so we can get the intervention to be really tailored to the reasons behind them not being in school. There's you put this together, you have sort of a very sort of series of steps. You want to engage students and parents. We want to recognize good attendance and improved attendance. What people have found over time is incentives work on the sort of social recognition level. It's not so much about getting stuff, but it's about being recognized as doing something good. And kids at all ages, from early on to who might seem to be the toughest fronting adolescent, respond to being recognized for doing something good. So just shout-outs for the most improved homeroom, or for the kids that made it 5 days in a row when they've never made it 5 days in a row before. All kinds of things to get that little incentive to say, if I'm on the fence and it's raining out and I'm going to have to sit at a bus stop and get soaked, it's like worth it to go because there's some positive recognition on the other end for sort of doing that. And often you can get peer pressure flipped and get kids, the whole homeroom is trying to have good attendance. They're texting their friends like, where are you? We want to make sure we have everyone here. So there's ways to sort of reverse those sort of peer influences in positive ways. This idea of constantly monitoring and reacting, and both at the group level and the school level and the individual level. And then once we see kids are trending towards being chronic absenteeism, doing that personal outreach, figuring out who has a relationship with them, who can make them feel welcome in school, who can talk to them, build a sense of trust, understand what's going on and learn the root cause, and then be able to direct them to the folks that can help them is sort of key. And this then sort of fits into the next slide, which is, again, taking that tiered approach, doing that good, upfront, positive things, making school a place kids want to be, making them feel welcome, making them feel at home. Again, you can see that many districts and schools have got, a couple good points gained by just making parents feel welcome when they walk in the building and having, coffee for them and a smile as opposed to, yelling at them because their kid is late. And the same thing for kids. We all respond to those sort of positive, warm encounters, and there's ways to build that in. And then when that doesn't work, having the ability to respond to those kids by mentors and other ways to sort of make sure that every kid that's struggling, we can have an individualized action plan for. And the reason that's important is that once a student is chronically absent, we either need to solve a problem or change a behavior to address it. And if you can think about that for a moment, it's really hard to solve a problem or change a behavior if we don't have a positive relationship with that student and his or her family. None of us responds to someone just yelling at us to tell us to do something, or just saying, I don't know you, but if it's for your good, I'm going to tell you this, and you better do this. We only really respond when we have a positive relationship and we have some trust, and then we will listen much more likely to those people and work with them towards a solution. So what I want to leave us with here, before we learn from lessons from the field from Charles, is really an experience we've had on how to build a systematic approach to creating a system that lets us have those relationships so we can solve those problems and change those behaviors to reduce chronic absenteeism. And this is what we've sort of called the school success mentor model, and it's really built on this idea of a few key pieces. One, having data, having ready access at the school level to who has different levels of attendance issues, and having triggers and signals and different colors to say this person is trending towards being chronically absent, using our 10% rule. Having a principal or a designee-led weekly, or if you can't do a weekly, bi-weekly meeting where this attendance data is being monitored, and we're looking for school-wide trends and classroom trends and grade-level trends, looking for strategic ways to intervene above the individual to see if it's coming, if there's a spike of attendance issues in a classroom, what's going on in the classroom, or a grade, what's happening with the grade, or the school itself. Is it something about the season or what's going on? How can we address it at the macro level? And then for kids, that's not enough, being able to assign them with a success mentor who is an adult in the school that can interact with them. It turns out at least 3 times a week. 2 of those times can be quite short. So glad to see you today, Charles. It's wonderful when you're here. I expect to see you tomorrow, and if not, I'm going to call you. So you're going to be here, right? And are you ready to go to have a great day today? Did you get your work done? Let's just double check that because I want to make sure you're set up for success. And then one meeting is a longer meeting, maybe an activity or a longer discussion or a thing to sort of build those bonds of like trust and support. And from that discussion, the mentors are trying to both be a reason for the kids to come to school because their mentors expecting them there, and also to learn about those root causes, and then have a mechanism for those mentors to share those root causes back with that weekly student success meeting using Google Docs or other means so they can feel as a way to share what they're learning with the folks that can figure out how to do more systematic responses. Supporting that with this welcoming and positive messaging, telling kids that being in school matters, school is a welcome place to be, it's got a positive climate, we're keeping you notified at home about where you are with attendance. And then finally building up stronger partnerships with youth and service agencies. Many times in cities there are many folks that can help kids with the out-of-school issues that challenge them, but there's hard to connect the kid at school to those services. Oftentimes schools feel all they can do is give a referral and hope it works. But we found that schools that have succeeded have invited those folks to the table. They come maybe once a month. They attend those weekly meetings, and they can really explain both the supports they are able to provide and help understand like which kids might benefit from them most. So when we put all this thing together, we've got good results. And if we go to the next slide, we can see some of those. This was basically done first in New York City, and then it's been done more nationally started with the Obama administration. It now continues with the U.S. Department of Education and the School Success Mentor Program that about 30 districts are participating in. And we find that when we do that whole system that we just saw, the weekly meetings, the success mentors, the positive climate, the integration of youth and service providers driven by data, that students with prior histories of chronic absenteeism paired with a success mentor gained about 2 more weeks of schooling, which was really educationally significant. If you come to school 2 more weeks, you will see improvements in your academic outcomes. In the top quarter of schools that really implemented this really strongly, it was actually some kids gained as much as a month of school. And we also found that some of the most at-risk kids, sort of over-age kids in high school that were chronically absent, that they were 52% more likely to come back the following year. Basically, we know if those kids, if you're overage in high school and chronically absent, and we don't put somebody with you, the odds of you returning the next year are very low. And the mentees reported they liked having a mentor, and it helped to improve their attendance and schoolwork. And we don't have it here, but the mentors were a combination of 3 folks. School staff and everybody in the building, from teachers to administrators to cafeteria cooks to security guards, they all had very positive views about being mentors, and it really felt like they were making a difference with kids, which was one of the reasons they got into education. External partners who work with the school, like AmeriCorps or like social work interns, also felt very positive outcomes. And then some schools use peer mentoring programs with structure, 12th graders working with 9th graders, 9th graders working with middle school kids. And in those cases, both the peer mentor and the mentors responded positive results. So I'm going to leave us with the big goal then. When we think about this, the takeaways from this is that chronic absenteeism is finally on our radar screens. 35 states are going to implement this as part of ESSA. What that means is they're going to start tracking how many kids are missing 10% or more of school and trying to react against it. This is a really great thing that's happening because for too long this has been sort of this quiet background thing that's been impacting all of our other efforts to make schools better, and we didn't really know about it because when we tracked average daily attendance, we got fooled because we could have average daily attendance in the low 90s, and we're hardwired to think anything in the 90s is an A, good, and not recognize that if you have average daily attendance in the low 90s, you could easily have a quarter of your kids missing a month or more of school because it's different kids on different days making up that ADA. And if we're not tracking how many kids are not coming regularly and how many kids are, we're missing much of the story. And by missing much of that story, we really left a powerful improvement tool on the table, which we now have back in our hands. And what we've learned is we can do a lot to help kids come to school every day. It can have good impacts, and it's got sort of a modest cost to it. So it really is a powerful lever we got to learn how to use, and we saw some ways to do it here. And now I'm going to turn you over to Charles, who's going to then talk about some of the ways that he's learned working in the field and some of the supports he's learned is necessary to help schools build some of these response systems we've talked about and some of these success mentor programs so they're able to build an effective response. In some ways you can learn about how to do that, and then we'll come back at the end and be able to have some Q&A.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. So I think many of you may understand that Bob is the king of the research, and we try to follow up that research with implementation. So we apply what he has learned through his analysis and his research and evaluation studies so that we can then implement them in evidence-based ways, ideally with fidelity to get the impact that our students deserve. So we have typically talent development has worked in 50 to 60 schools over the course of a year. Typically have a staff out in the field of some 40 to 70 people, depending on the year. And we've realized that setting up early warning systems is actually one of the highest leverage moves you can make, certainly toward chronic absenteeism. And if we're following up on Bob's point, chronic absenteeism really is a lead indicator. If the kids aren't there at school, it's very difficult, obviously, to move them forward academically. But then you make it triggered to implement an intervention. And if those kids aren't there, you're still going to be grinding your wheels, hoping to get impact when the kids that you're trying to impact aren't even coming. So it's really our low-hanging and our kind of low-hanging fruit to get at this issue first and foremost. And as Bob said, it's often much easier to get at than we think if we just follow the data. So what we'll do is we'll do the data analysis for you. We'll tell you how to set up an early warning indicator system, which basically means either once every 2 weeks at the least and ideally once a week, you're looking at attendance, behavior, and course performance. And as we know from the research, those indicators are most predictive of finishing high school on time. If our kids finish 9th grade on track in those 4 indicators, they have a 75% chance of graduating on time. If they don't, their chances go to 25. So it's very important to have a system in place that proactively identifies which kids are falling off track and in which indicator they're falling off track on. So we help you develop those tracking systems, and we've developed some very simple access packages that can literally help you cobble together the 3 critical data streams you need and then start meeting on those data streams in a collaborative way with ideally an interdisciplinary team talking about their own experience with the kids that are showing red off track in that particular indicator. Let's go to the next one if we could, Lynette. I think it's really important to understand that if we are working with a school, we're going to help them identify their resources. And resources occur at 3 different levels. If you look over at the right grid, you'll see that there are really 3 levels of intervention. There are things you can do across the whole school. There are things you can do for a targeted group of kids that have, shown that they're particularly struggling with a certain issue, in this case, chronic absenteeism. And then there's a small number of kids that are really needing an individual intervention because they're really suffering or struggling with a major life issue that's going to take some casework to get them back on track. So we work across those 3 tiers, across the 3 ABCs, and we work with school teams to identify what supports or interventions they have in each of those blocks within that grid. So then you have the starting point of at least how best to intervene on the kid that shows up with that off-track indicator at that various level. So we can go on if we could. As Bob talked about, the My Brother's Keeper Success Mentor Initiative really came about as a result of the Obama administration team identifying our work as most impactful in getting off-track kids back on track, particularly in the areas of absenteeism. Your biggest and high-leverage moves are at the 6th and 9th grade level, and the Success Mentor is really, as Bob described, it's an effort to identify those kids that are chronically absent at the highest leverage entry point, 6th and 9th grade, and then figuring out what's the best way to get them back on track, whether it's a whole school intervention or whether they actually need a success mentor. So as Bob said, that could be existing mentors that are coming to the school already from a college work-study program. It could be a Big Brothers Big Sisters program. But more often than not, it's as easily executed by the staff that lives and works in the school every day. So this is not a resource-rich intervention. It can often be mobilized with the staff that's already in the school and already knows the kids. As Bob said, you're holding at least a bi-monthly meeting, ideally a weekly meeting, looking at the data, and then you're building connections between the school staff, the youth, and any additional service providers that are either coming to the school or you identify need to come to the school to make the intervention needed. So, and we're also working on whole school activities to improve attendance, whether that's an attendance challenge between homerooms or between grades, or whether that's the welcome at the beginning of the day from a team of teachers, or it's the principal out front shaking everyone's hand as they come in, or it's the teacher outside his or her classroom welcoming every student to school. Whatever it takes to create a warm connection and a nurturing and welcoming place to be. In terms of the early warning systems, I think you know them. They're attendance, behavior, and course performance. When you have attendance below 85%, you show red. And when you show red, you typically come up for a discussion at an early warning indicator meeting with that teacher team that's working with that student. Again, then you identify where that kid is. Is he suffering from a whole school issue? Could he benefit from just a coach nagging and nurturing him, like in the form of a success mentor? Or is he dealing with a major life issue that Bob mentioned, homelessness, recent death in the family, taking care of a sibling, whatever it might be? We find out at those meetings through the collective knowledge of that teacher team what is the right intervention at the right time for that student. So the EWS support package, we've found increasingly that EWS, early warning systems, are kind of starting to become universally known. In many of our largest districts, district leaders, even school leaders, know what early warning indicators are. They know the ABCs, and they even know often what early warning indicator systems are. Oftentimes in our satellite districts and our smaller districts, the information is not as readily accessible, and we're starting to realize we had to put packages together of support, and we've certainly provided a lot of support to the major districts over the last 10 years. We're starting to see more and more of the smaller districts, satellite districts, lower level or lower tier cities outside of the major urban areas needing this support. So we have what we think is a very accessible and a cost-effective way to support you in trying to build these systems in your school. So if we could go to the next slide. So we have just recently launched this promotion, and we want to make this available at a discounted rate to the first 30 schools that respond. We are going to make an early warning and or chronic absenteeism training available to you, which includes two-day on-site trainings for up to 3 staff members, and this could occur in the spring or the summer. And then we'll provide you with 3 follow-up visits at your school site, and we'll give you virtual support in between with our staff that's very experienced in these issues. I think what's really important to mention is ESSA is going to call on these, require these systems to be built and incorporated and managed during the ESSA era, and this really gives districts a chance to get one up on what's likely coming down the pike in the next 6 months in terms of requirements to track this data. So we thought this would be an optimal way to support you in getting a jump start on what is very soon coming down the pike. In addition, we want to give you an opportunity to go even deeper on this. We're going to provide a 2-day training in New Orleans this July 10th and 11th. It's a wonderful hotel, Intercontinental Hotel in New Orleans, and this will allow you to go much deeper with facilitation and do some understanding of how the issues play out in a school, and really give you some role play opportunities, some scenario analysis, so that you can come up with your own plans on how you might deal with a proposed situation, so that you're better versed in going back to your communities with some ideas. So we'd love to open it up now for some questions. Again, if you want to avail yourself of either of those opportunities, you can just follow the link that we've listed there, and we will respond to you very quickly. But right now, let's just take questions for anyone that's a little more clarity, wants to follow up on any of the issues that were mentioned during the last 45 minutes. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you could type them in the chat box right now, so that'll keep us from dealing with them vocally. So I think we have a few questions being written, so we'll give another couple minutes and then we'll try to respond to them. And I believe the PowerPoint will be available after the training, and we will make the recording available to everyone that was on the webinar. So Sarah Kleiss, we are sharing the link again for the trainings. And again, we'll get it out to you right after.
So, Charles, one question we often get is how do you get teachers involved in this? Aren't teachers already full up, and aren't they already have a full day and plus some and already working above and beyond? And one of the things we found is that you have to start with those that are interested and willing, and begin your success venture with those that would like to try it out. And often what we find, though, is once you get a few people doing it, it can really snowball, because the people that do it find it to be quite rewarding, because again, most educators got into the work to help kids, and sometimes it's a distal experience when you're just working really hard with many kids, and you sort of, you work hard, and then, you don't get any kind of feedback till a year later, and then you don't really know how it ends up with the kids. But if you can work directly with the kids to help them resolve issues and make them come to school more frequently and do, you get very immediate rewards, a very action that you made a difference in a kid's life. And as soon as a few teachers see that, they really tell others how rewarding it is, and you often then get a very snowball effect. And we've had some schools where you could then get very high participation among teachers. Again, maybe each taking 1 or 2 kids, something that's manageable. Some districts have asked them to challenge them to take even up to 5. If they sort of have a strong sort of culture behind it, that can happen. But really start small with those that are willing, and have the success build upon itself to really build up that idea that is building those direct relationships with kids is the most powerful antidote we can have. Because many times kids will not tell you the real reason right away, right? And again, that could sort of waste a lot of time and can actually lead us to do things that are counterproductive. So it's really powerful to think how we can build up that adult participation and build those direct relationships is really a driver of how we can address this issue.
Yeah, I agree, Bob. I think whenever you're starting a new initiative, it's very much in your interest strategically to identify the people you have a strong sense are going to implement it well and also have the respect of their peers in the building. I think we've seen many cases where we may have started with people that didn't necessarily champion the cause, and as soon as we passed the baton to someone who did and could, we saw a very dramatic difference in the uptake and, in the work. I think, for a first 4 or 5 years of us implementing EWS systems in many schools across the country, we would regularly see folks that had heretofore been very frustrated, isolated, thrown up their hands in frustration that we couldn't make impacts on vulnerable kids at scale. But when we saw them operate in teacher teams with other coworkers who maybe saw the kid in math or science while you taught them in English, all of a sudden you're bringing to bear a different perspective. That teacher might have 100% different understanding or perception of that kid's talents and capacities, and that person may know that well. All of a sudden, that knowledge and that empathy is brought to bear on you, and now you can generate more empathy, sensitivity, and support for that kid. We've also seen teachers say, never have I felt like I've been a part of a team of adults before. So I think one of the biggest things we can think about when we do this well is creating common planning time for teams of teachers who share a group of kids, 75 to 90 kids, so that they can meet at least once every 2 weeks, maybe once a week at best, to talk about how they can support them.
So we have a question from Diana. Can you discuss a bit further some examples of Tier 1 supports that schools could put in place to begin the process to further attendance interventions? Yeah, so a couple of good examples of Tier 1s are sort of like those homeroom competitions, right, to try to get, in just very short cycles, this week. So which homeroom this week, had the most improved attendance and the best attendance? Because if you just do best, one group will win all the time, but you want to recognize both. So best attendance and best improved attendance. And just have a shout out or give some sort of recognition award or some privilege. It doesn't have to be expensive or big stuff, but just that recognition that somebody is noticing. The other thing we can do is to really kids love to see put pictures up on the wall of the kids that have sort of met those accomplishments in a little attendance hall of fame, right, of improvements and levels. Another key thing to do is to sort of, again, is to, just create that welcoming environment. Have people feel very welcome to be in school. Again, some schools have had pretty impressive results by just making the office a place parents want to be, is a place that they're trying to avoid as they drop their kids off. So it is those things to increase the welcoming atmosphere of the school and to give social recognitions for improved attendance and better attendance are some of the sort of most simplest, low-cost ways you can build up some of those Tier 1 supports. And then the other one, which is a little bit, is to fill the way that every absence gets some sort of response, and not like a robocall, but some sort of human response, so kids know that when they're not there, someone is missing them and noticing them. Because for many older kids, it's like nobody knows, no one cares, no one misses me. Why should I be there?
The other thing I would say is just if you have the wherewithal and the latitude to think about the school redesign, academies or small learning communities are critical to creating personable, accountable learning spaces so that all kids feel like they know the adults and the adults are working together and all adults feel like they know the kids, not only from their own vantage point and their own discipline, but also across disciplines of, academics. You can often distribute the leadership, and when you have a teacher team in place, you can give that teacher team the wherewithal to design their own way to get attendance increased. So I think the more that you can create these small, personable, accountable spaces, empower the people that are overseeing those spaces and the students with their own opportunity to design their own ways that they would increase their attendance. The more you're empowering student voice and teacher voice.
And a final one is those nudge letters home. Is this on a regular basis? It has to be every 6 to 8 weeks. Send a postcard, an email, a text home that just sort of says, your son or daughter has missed so many days of school recently. We just want to let you know that we really want them here every day. We miss them when they're not here. And a day here and a day there can really add up. And soon enough, you can see from just giving them a data point that if you miss so much, it increases your odds of not being successful in school. And a place to look for some is the Attendance Works website, as well as also the Everyone Graduates Center and the National Center for Attendance, Success, and Engagement are a couple of places where you can find some online resources to support those efforts.
One other place we've had a lot of success with is Get Schooled, national organization that runs kind of incentive programs for kids. But you don't have to go to an external partner. They just create very creative, enticing ways for kids to feel motivated to come to school. And they celebrate it after, as Bob says, a short period of time. And it's just a powerful, first assess and survey what kids want most, what they would feel most rewarded by, then create a friendly competition, run it in a short period of time, and then make sure you recognize both students and teachers that have been very effective in the process. Any other questions? We're looking. So, no, I think we're good. So, folks, feel free. We'll get the PowerPoint out to you. We'll get the recording out to you. And if you have any questions, you want to go deeper in any of this, feel free to call or email Laura Wheeldryer, our Chief Program Officer, and she can connect you with the right resource. I want to thank Dr. Balfanz for his time. And again, let us know in any way that we can help you. Thank you. Have a great afternoon.